Hello there, my name is Mal of Keen Beans Studio, and in this video I'm going to show you how to play Almighty. I'm going to teach you how to play the competitive game, how each of the four gods works, and I will show you how to operate the free will automa for cooperative or solo play. This version is a prototype. It is current as of the Kickstarter, but there is still lots of things that are subject to change, lots of art that is placeholder or graphics that are temporary, so please keep that in mind. In Almighty, you are an ancient god who is a jerk. There are four gods in the game. There's the god of storms, the god of love, the god of the dead, and the god of the sun. Almighty is a game played over 3 ages, tracked here on this feast table. And this is the flagon, which is the round marker. So round 1, 2, and 3. At the end of 3 ages, whoever has the most glory, the points scored here on this score track, wins the game. The little icon for glory is this sort of white star, little white sparkly star. And there are a couple different ways to get glory. The most important ones are festivals and fulfilling prophecies. This is the mortal plane, and these happy little fellows are the mortals living on it. There are 4 different lands. We've got the deserts, the mountains, the forests, and the islands. And at the end of each round, the inhabitants of these lands will hold a festival, rewarding the god who impacted them there the most with glory and an offering. So at the end of the round, each of these 4 lands are going to score, and the value of the land that you're going to win is the number of yellow stars in that land minus any red stars. Yellow stars can be found on a couple different components. They got them on the mortal cards themselves, on huts, on the capital flag, and on some components like here, the god of love, on their hearts. So in this case, the winner of this land would get 3 glory, 1, 2, and 3. The winner of this land would get no glory. This is worth 1 plus 1, but this pilgrim is unworthy, has a red star worth -1. The winner of this land is winning a land that is technically worth -1 total, but you can't lose glory. So the winners of both these lands would both not get any points. And the winner of this land here would get 1 point because you have 1 yellow star in there. So the value of a land is its yellow stars minus any red stars. And just to be clear, any stars that you see inside these effect boxes don't count towards the value of the land. It is only the value of the mortal themselves or the component. So festivals is one way to score glory. Another important way to get glory is through these prophecy cards. You're going to have a prophecy card in hand hidden each round, and they look something like this. Prophecies will score you the glory listed down here at the bottom if its condition is true when you are done with the round. So the players might not all be done at the same time, that you can play to go out faster or hold back and go out later. And if at the point which you go out, this condition is true, you get to score these points. You reveal your prophecy and you score those glory immediately. All prophecies just want you to have one land that is worth more in value than another land. So here, this prophecy I have wants the deserts, here, the deserts, cactuses, to be worth more than the mountains. Currently, that's not true. The deserts is worth less. The desert's worth -1, and the mountains are worth 0. So this prophecy is false. If it looked like this, now this desert is worth +2, and the mountains is worth 0. This prophecy is true. So at the end of the round, I reveal it. I would score 3 points. Or if we were in the 3rd age here, I would score an additional 2 for 5. So in the first 2 ages, prophecies are worth 3 glory each, and in the final age, prophecies are worth 5 glory. On your turn, you're going to play act cards from hand into one of the 4 lands, and then impact with its effect the mortals that are there. When you play, you just play the card underneath the land itself, and then other players can play in their own column. Try to keep your cards in a single column, so if you're playing to where you already have cards, just stack them like this so you can see the belief value. Other players playing on the other side of the table will play like this to there, on their side of the board. So you just play on your side, under the land on your side of the table. The belief value is how much belief is generated by the acts that you've performed in that land, how much the mortals living there believe in you. And that is the strength number that determines who is the winner of the points that are there at the end of the round, who wins the festival. So in this case, the god of the dead here has 2 belief, and all the other gods have 1, and so the god of the dead wins the forest festival. So on your turn, the first thing you're going to do is activate any start of turn effects. Now, the only gods that have to worry about start of turn effects are the god of the sun. They must advance the sun, and the god of the dead. They must judge the dead. I'll get to what those mean later, but the important thing is to know this little yellow hourglass is start of turn effects, and this is when you would activate them. The second and main thing you're going to be doing on your turn is playing acts. You're going to play 1 or 2 act cards from hand on your turn. You could play those face up or face down. Face up has this little open eye icon, face down has this little closed eye icon. When you play a card face up, you're playing it for its printed effect. And a very important rule is you can only legally play a card if you can fulfill the full effect that's printed on it. So here, for example, let's say we wanted to play this card, listen to your heart, poke 1 or 2 mortals here with a heart. Well, there are no mortals here. These cards are mortals. These huts are not, don't count as mortals. And so we can't play this card here. The same are true of mortals. If you were to impact a mortal that would have an effect, it has to be able to do its effect in order for that play to be legal. If you make a tree fall in the forest and no mortals are there to see it, it doesn't get you any belief. There are 2 kinds of act cards. There are basic acts, which have this white border, and all of the gods have a starting deck of 10 basic white bordered acts, and they're somewhat symmetrical. There are slight differences between them, but they generally have the same content in the basic decks. These cards are the mighty acts, and those ones you're going to gain as the game progresses. Those do not have a border, they're borderless, and they have effects that are completely unique to that god and their system. Most act cards have following features. There's the belief value, which is the strength in terms of who's going to win the festival. Some cards have a power cost. That's this little minus power icon, and you need to be able to pay power from your supply in order to play this to the land. This scroll icon is a play requirement. So the scroll indicates the board, which is also a scroll, and it means that you have to play it to a land that has that thing. So in this case, the god of love must play this to a land where there is already a heart. So in this case, for example, they could play this card here because it satisfies this requirement. Here, for example, the god of the sun must play this card to where the sun piece is. They couldn't play it here. There are a couple different kinds of actions you'll find on act cards and on mortals. First is create. This little green plus symbol means you will create either a mortal or a hut, whichever is indicated by the card. When you create a mortal, you can choose from the mortal display either of the 2 that are face up or pull randomly from this deck. Generally speaking, unless a card says otherwise, you are always impacting the land where you play the card. So you would create the mortal into that land. If you create the leftmost mortal here, you'll see you'll get a point. So creating the leftmost mortal just gets you a point right away on the board. If you create the leftmost mortal, you're not going to move this over immediately. You're going to do that at the end of your turn, so you can't get those points twice in a row. And if you create randomly, obviously just flip it over. If you create a hut, you're just going to pull a hut from the supply and add it to the land. If there are no huts in the supply, you're going to pull it from another land. So let's say this is the case at the moment, and you create a hut here, you're going to pull from one of these 2 lands. So huts in Almighty are not necessarily literal huts. They represent the prosperity of the mortals in that land, thanks to your efforts or their own efforts. And their capital is represented by this flag, and the capital will immediately move if it sees another land that has more huts than the one that it's in. So let's say this is the situation, and we were to play this card over here. We create a hut. Capital doesn't move because there are not more huts in the mountains and the forest. They're the same number. But if we were to create another hut here, now the capital flag immediately moves here. The capital is now in the mountains. The same is true if we were to remove a hut here. If we were to smite this hut, now the capital sees more huts here in the mountains and it moves immediately. The capital is important for prophecies and some cards that require being played at the capital. The next thing you can do is poke a mortal. There are 2 types of mortals, and they have 2 different colored boxes. There are pokeable mortals with this brightly colored box, and then there are mortals with ongoing effects that have this hourglass. You can only poke a mortal with a pokeable effect. You can't poke a mortal with an ongoing effect. So if you're going to poke this mortal, you can poke the Graveler and then trigger their impact, add +1 belief to any act in play. There are belief tokens here, which let you add or remove belief to or from acts. And some mortals, when poked or when impacted, will trigger chaining effects with other mortals. That is possible. The next thing we can do is bless or curse mortals. And this is how you alter the value of mortals themselves. So if we were to bless this Sacred Dancer, for example. We would find a blessing. You can choose any of these up here. The text is just for flavor and narrative purpose. And add that to the mortal that you've blessed. If a mortal is already worthy, you just add this to them, and now they are double. So now this Sacred Dancer is worth +2 instead of +1. If we were to bless them again, we add another one. There's no limit to the number of blessings or curses that can be on a mortal. However, if we were to bless this Groveler, they're unworthy at the moment. And a mortal cannot be both worthy and unworthy. They cannot have both red and yellow stars. They can only have one or the other. So if we were going to bless the Groveler with strength, they're strong now, we cover up this red star. So now that has swung the Groveler's value from -1 to +1. There's no such thing as a 0 value mortal. And if we were to bless them again, obviously we would keep adding them. If we were to curse a mortal that already has blessing tokens, we don't add a curse, we just remove one. We curse them again, we remove this. Now they're unworthy again. And if we were to curse them again, obviously now we add curse tokens, and now they are going into the negative in value. So mortals can only be worth positive or negative value, and cursing or blessing them will alter that value up or down by 1. And notice that when you curse, you also get 1 glory, 1 point. Next up is tempting and banishing. This is how you move mortals between the lands. When you tempt a mortal, you can bring any other mortal from any other land. Let's say here, I could bring Sacred Dancer, the Pilgrim, or the Groveler into this land. So let's say we bring the Pilgrim, which notice has an ongoing effect when moved, add a blessing. Oh, they become a genius on their pilgrimage. There is no adjacency rule to movement unless a card specifies it. So you could tempt a mortal from one end of the map all the way to the other with a single action. You don't have to move them into an adjacent land. Banishing is the opposite of tempt. It moves a mortal from the land that you're playing to any other land. Again, no adjacency problems. So here we're going to banish this Pilgrim. Go find your true love. Pilgrim could be the Groveler. And of course, when they move, they get another blessing, become rich. And the final action you'll be able to take is to smite. A little red X. When you smite a mortal, you put them in the graveyard. And the martyr specifically, when smited, gains us 2 extra belief. So of course we'll do that. When you gain belief from a mortal, it goes onto the act that triggered the effect, unless it says otherwise, like the Groveler does. If you smite a mortal that has tokens on them, then those tokens go back to the supply when they enter the graveyard. You can also smite huts. Here, let's say we poke this Pyromaniac. He's going to smite a hut. Here, smiting huts just brings them back to the supply. And remember that creating or smiting huts might alter where the capital is. If a mortal or a card says here, that means this land that you're playing the card to or where they are. When in doubt, effects are always happening in the land where you play the card, but some cards will specify it. Some mortals will say when moved, like the Pilgrim we saw earlier. And this means when they are banished or tempted or moved. It does not mean when they enter the graveyard or when they are created. That doesn't count as movement. Movement is only when they're moving between lands. Some mortals, like this Prospector, specify when entering, and this counts as movement or indeed when they are created. So here the Prospector, if they were created into the mountains, they would immediately gain a blessing. So that's playing cards face up, but you can also play cards face down. And each god at the bottom left of their player board has a slightly different selection of possible face down actions that they can take, as indicated by this little closed eye card icon. To do that, you just play the card from hand face down into the land, and face down cards will get you 1 belief. As with the face up cards, though, you have to actually do an action. You can't just play a card face down into a land with no effect. You must actually do something. So that's this step. You can play 1 or 2 acts on your turn. If you still have act cards left in hand after that point, then skip step number 3 and go right to the final step, which is refilling the mortal display. So again, at the end of your turn is when this display would refill. Just slide cards over and draw a new one to fill the slots. If, however, after playing 1 or 2 acts, we are out of cards, then we look at step number 3, no cards left. We are out for the round, and there are 2 steps that we take. First, we reveal and resolve our prophecy. So this is the point where we reveal to the other players what our prophecy card is. Here, deserts is worth more than the mountains. And then if that's true, this is where we would score these points. 3 in rounds 1 and 2, 5 in round 3, and discard the prophecy into a prophecy discard pile. If the prophecy is false, if this is not true, and the deserts, like as in here, are not actually worth more than the mountains, then we can, this little symbol is a reminder of this, we can play this prophecy face down, and it'll give us a bonus 2 belief to any acts we already have there. I couldn't play this into a land where I have no acts, but I could use it to boost the acts I already have there and maybe try and take over, for example, here from another player. A face down prophecy does not count as an act, so I couldn't, like with the Groveler, add belief to this card, for example. This is just a bonus 2 belief. If the 2 lands are equal value, as they are here, then the prophecy is still false. The prophecy always wants one land to be more than the other. If your prophecy has the capital and a different land on it, and the capital is in the land that's indicated, then it is false. Once you've resolved your prophecy, either true or false, then it's time for you to take a seat at the feast table. You're going to take your little god figure from your player board, and you're going to place them on the highest available seat and earn immediately the glory underneath that seat. 1, 2, 3. There are 2 benefits to going out earlier. The first is that you can claim the seat with more points, and the second is that this is the order in which ties are broken. So if you're wondering what happens in a land where 2 gods have the same amount of belief, you look to the feast table to break ties. The earlier you go out, the better chance you have of breaking those ties. The later you go out, the more control you will have over the board state. Once you've done that, then you're out of the round, and other players who still have cards keep playing, and if turn sequence comes back to you, you're skipped. You don't trigger any start of turn effects or once you're out of the round. If you're the last player playing and you still have 3 or even 4 cards in hand, then you play out your whole hand, and you don't take additional turns either. You just play all cards from your hand out. Once all players have taken a seat at the feast table and revealed their prophecies and are out of the round, notice that, by the way, there's only 3 seats. So in a 4-player game, if you're last, you won't get to take a seat at all. You just miss the feast completely. Once all players are out of the round, then it's the end of the age and we score festivals. So in each of the lands, you can resolve them in any order. You look to see who has the most belief there. Here, God of Love has 3 belief. The God of the Sun has 1, so the God of Love wins here. And they would get 1, 2, 3, minus 1 is 2 points. And they get the offering that's at the top of the stack here. So each of the lands has a stack of 3 offerings, and whoever wins, in addition to the glory there, is going to get the offering there. And that's important because offerings are worth points at the end of the game, either 1 or 2. These points are hidden until the end, and they have different types. There are 4 different types of offerings, and that's important because at the start you will have been given a favored offering type, which is going to get you an extra point for each offering of that kind you have at the end. So in this land here, sun and storms are tied. So remember, we look to the feast table. Storms went out earlier, which means they break ties, which means they're going to win this land. Now it's not worth any glory here. They don't lose a glory because -2 + 1. They don't lose any glory. They don't get any, but they do get this offering. And again, that might be good for them because here, that's their favorite type. In a 4-player game only, there are second place points that are scored. In this case here, God of Love has 3 belief, which is more than anyone else. So they're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points plus the offering. And then second place is going to get half the points rounded down. Now there's a tie here between Sun and Dead, of who they both have 2 belief. Again, we look to the feast table. Sun breaks the tie, so they're going to get half of 5 points rounded down, just 2 points. They don't get any offerings though. Any land where there haven't been any act cards played at all just doesn't have a festival. Nobody gets these points, and nobody gets this offering. This just gets discarded from play. Once all the 4 lands have resolved the festival, then it's time to start the new age. First thing you do is discard all act cards from play. Those acts go into your player discard pile, which is here on the right side of your player board. Any belief tokens on cards go back to the supply. If you have mighty acts, they don't go to your discard pile. Mighty acts get discarded from play completely. Only basic acts go back to your discard. Next, everybody takes back their god figure. Feast time is over. And then you advance the flagon to the next age. You'll notice here is an indicator that you're going to gain some mighty acts. So in between ages, you're going to add mighty acts to your hand. Mighty acts are unique to each god, and there are 2 types. There are merciful mighty acts with that little contented face in the top corner, and there are wrathful mighty acts, which is a little angry face. To figure out which one you get, you look to the score track. If you are 5 or more points behind the leader, then you are wrathful and you get wrathful acts. You're not happy with the mortals, and you're going to let them know about it. Otherwise, you get a merciful mighty act. So in this case, the God of Sun and the God of Storms would both take merciful mighty acts. The God of Love and the God of the Dead would take wrathful mighty acts. Then you draw a new prophecy. You draw 5 new basic acts from your deck. If your deck is empty, you reshuffle your discard into a new draw deck and draw from there. Pass the first player marker clockwise, and then start a new round. Notice that mighty acts don't count towards the 5 acts that you draw. So in age 2, you're going to have 6 acts in hand, and in age 3, players are going to have 7 acts. After all the festivals have been resolved at the end of the 3rd round, then the game is over. Everybody reveals glory that they have on their offerings. They gain any additional points for favored offerings that they have and add that to their score. If your score goes above 40, you just loop around back to the beginning and add 40 to your final score. And the player with the most glory wins, breaking any ties with the feast table. So a game of Almighty is about playing cards to the lands, impacting the mortals there, moving them, removing them, changing their value, adding or removing huts or the capital in order to achieve your prophecy and have the most belief in the most valuable lands to score that, or to remove value from lands where your opponents are winning. Now I want to talk about each of the 4 gods and their sort of asymmetric system or puzzle that they have. Starting with the god of the sun, the god with the original day job. Their start of turn action is to advance the sun. The gods of the sun, when they're in play, there's this sun token that begins the leftmost land, and at the start of their turn, the first thing the god of the sun must do is move the sun into the next land to the right. The sun is important because, as indicated on the top of it, when the sun god plays acts face up under the land where the sun is, then they gain an extra belief on that act. This does not count to acts that are played face down. The face down acts the sun god can take are to just create a mortal, or to push the sun, which means if they play face down to the land that the sun is in, they can push it to the next land and advance it even further. When the sun would move off the rightmost land, it flips to the night side, comes back to the sun player, and then they gain 3 power. This is the only way the sun god gains power. So the sun god's puzzle, apart from having to track the sun across the lands as it moves, is also about budgeting the power that they get. At the start of a turn where the sun piece is on the night side, it flips back to day, goes into the leftmost land again, and then once again each turn moves again. And so the sun goes in this circuit. Note that the sun god cannot take this action to push the sun piece out of night. The god of love gets their power from pairing up mortals on the lands with their heart tokens. And they do that by taking this face down action to spread love. To do that, they play a card face down to a land with a pair of mortals that doesn't already have a heart, and add any one of these heart tokens to the mortals like this, pairing them up. If they've done that to the land where they've played the card face down, and there are other mortals on lands in play that are not paired up, they can continue to spread love. So in this way, the god of love can spread more than one heart across all the lands as long as the first land they play to puts a heart out. Putting hearts out reveals this power token. So once the god of love has spread love, then they take power equal to the number of those symbols, the power symbols that they have revealed. The value on the hearts represents the kind of relationship that these mortals are in. This prophet and this saint are in just a terrible, toxic relationship, whereas this demagogue and this necromancer are actually getting along really well. This does add or subtract from the value of the land. So in this case here, the land is worth 0 because +1, 2, -1, 2, and this land is worth +1. If a mortal in a pair would get removed or moved away, let's say they get banished to a different land or they get smited into the graveyard, then the heart is broken and it returns to the player board of the god of love, which is not a bad thing because that's how they need to gain more power, is getting their hearts back and then putting them back out again. So the god of love does want to pair mortals up in love, and it wants to break the hearts as well. If a card effect would move 2 mortals that are connected with a heart to the same location, then the heart stays with them. The god of storms is unique in that their cards don't cost power at all. Instead, they have these 4 thundercloud tokens, which are their power. And their cards all either cost or require being played in a land where there are thunderclouds. When you spend thunderclouds, this little icon here indicates that you must move that number of thunderclouds away in order to play the card. So you could play this card here and then move this. You can move it anywhere you want, no adjacency. Say you move it there. This one here requires playing 2, where they're moving 2 thunderclouds. If you move 2, you can move them to different lands. They don't have to go to the same land, but you could not play an act to a land that requires thunderclouds if there aren't any there. So the Storm Gods puzzle is going to be all about playing cards to move clouds into lands where they are then going to play in the future as well, and sloshing these thundercloud tokens all around the map, kind of like a weather system. In a pinch, the god of the storms can take a face down action to gather 2 clouds to the land where they played face down. So like here, they could gather 1, 2 clouds. The god of the dead controls the underworld and interacts with mortals after they have been smited. So when the god of the dead is playing, you put this token into the graveyard to indicate that the normal rules for the graveyard don't apply. Instead, the graveyard and any effects that refer to the graveyard are now referring to these 4 grave slots are right above the God of the Dead's player board. Each of these grave slots corresponds to one of the 4 lands here in play, and when a mortal there is smited by the God of the Dead or by any player, that mortal comes right above the grave slot here. Each grave can only hold 1 mortal, so if there's already a mortal here and they are smited from the same location, the God of the Dead must choose one to keep and one to discard back into the box completely. If a mortal is smited and they have tokens on them, unlike the regular graveyard, the mortal keeps any tokens that was on them during life on the mortal plane. Only if that mortal is discarded completely from play does the token return back to the supply. The graveyard is not a land, so any effects like this one when moved don't apply when mortals are smited and enter the grave, or when they're resurrected back into the lands. The God of the Dead does have a few acts that let them poke mortals in the graveyard. So here, for example, poke a mortal here or in the graveyard. You can use that to poke mortals that are there. Or you can poke a mortal in the graveyard and act as though they were in this land. Imagine this like the ghost of one of these dead mortals, and it doesn't have to match the land icon. It can be any of the mortals in here. Imagine the ghost of them is haunting this land and taking acts from beyond the grave. So here they could poke the Bandit Queen to move a hut from the capital to here. It says here, again, imagine that they are in this land when poking a mortal that is in the graveyard. At the start of the God of the Dead's turn, they're going to judge the dead. They're going to judge all mortals that have arrived freshly from the last start of turn, and you're going to move them down like this, and for each one gain either a power or a point. The reason they get a point here is because unlike all the other gods, the God of the Dead does not have the ability as a face-down action to create mortals. They do have the ability as face-down actions to smite any mortals, and they can also resurrect mortals, which means pulling an immortal from any of these slots back to life into the land. Mortals that have been judged can't be judged again, so the only way for the God of the Dead to continue to get power is to either resurrect and smite again these mortals, or smite new mortals, and then judge them on start of future turns. Now let's talk about how you can play Almighty cooperatively or solo, which you do against the mortal free will itself, represented by this Automa deck, in which the mortals act according to their own unpredictable and often infuriating whims. Free will doesn't have a prophecy, but in addition to scoring festivals like any normal player, the free will Automa also scores what are called carnivals, which is the value of the lands along this rondel timer. Your goal in a solo or cooperative game is to have more points than free will. If you're playing cooperatively, your success is graded by the number of players who beat free will in points. If nobody beats free will, you lose completely. If everybody beats free will, it's a total victory. And if only a few players beat free will, then it's a partial victory. Free will always keep the first player marker and will always play first in the round. Free will always have this deck of 5 cards here on its player board, and this counts as its hand. When it's their turn, you draw a card from their hand, you flip it over, and then you use this information and the information on the back of the hand, the top card here, to make all the decisions that free will needs. There are 2 types of acts that free will can play. There are clever acts, indicated by this happy little fellow in the top left, and there are foolish acts, which are this little raggedy guy there. When you draw the card, you look at that type and then you compare it down here to the board, and this will tell you where to play the card. So here, for example, the grass is greener over there. It's a raggedy type foolish act. So you're going to look here and they're going to play it to the land where your favorite offering is. Here, your favorite offering is the nectar, and so they're going to play this card to this land. If more than one land meets that criteria, or if none of the lands meet that criteria, then they're going to use this fallback icon to determine where they play. So here they would look to the capital and they would play there. Then the free will has 2 parts to their actions, which is why there's a jaggedy line here on this. This is part 1 of their action, and then at the top of the deck underneath is part 2. First they do part 1, so here they would move a hut away from here. You would again look at this icon to determine where. In this case, you would try to first move it to the capital. Well, it is in the capital, so it can't be there, so it looks to the next land to the left of that, according to this arrow. So it's going to move it here, and of course that will also move the capital. The deserts and the islands are considered adjacent, so if free will is looking at the deserts fail, it keeps going in this direction, it loops it back around to the islands. If it plays it to this land and it can't do that, there are no huts here, then it has a fallback action, this otherwise action. And in this case, it will create a mortal here and then curse them. When creating mortals, free will always try to create the leftmost mortal in order to gain that point. If free will has to choose between multiple valid mortals, like here, for example, they want to smite an unworthy mortal, but there are 2 here to choose from, then it looks to the back of the deck to the mortal tiebreaker. If it says A, then it's going to pick the mortal in descending alphabetical order. If it has the Z, then it's going to go in reverse alphabetical order. So here, they're going to smite the heretic, which is higher in alphabetical order than the stubborn oaf. If free will sees one of these 2 icons, then it's either going to play the act to the land that you have up on your prophecy and generally try to devalue it, or improve the value of the land you have down on your prophecy. So this is your prophecy up and this is your prophecy down. If free will sees this icon, then it is going to look to the land that it is next going to have a carnival in, which is the land, whichever land this carnival marker is on. After free will does the first part of the action and completes it, then it looks down here to the second part. There are a couple different types of second actions it can take. It can play a second act. Now, free will only ever play maximum 2 acts, so if it sees this symbol twice, it just ignores it the second time. It might add belief to the act that it just played, or it might hold a carnival. A carnival means that free will is going to score the value of the land that its carnival marker is on, and then it's going to advance that marker to the next land on this rondel. It doesn't need to have the most belief in that land to gain those points, and it can't lose glory if the value of the land is negative. It also does not gain an offering from carnivals. If the carnival marker is on this empty slot, it just won't score it. Once free will has played out its hand, it will take the first most available seat and score those points. And when festivals are resolved, if it has more belief than a player, it will score those points as well, and it will gain the offering. It doesn't have a favorite offering, but it will get these points at the end of the game. Between the ages, instead of gaining mighty acts, free will gain inventions, which are special cards with ongoing effects that will get in your way. These cards are placed according to the land tiebreaker icon here, but not into a land where there already is an invention. Inventions have this chain at the top to indicate that they never get discarded. So between the ages, free will does not lose inventions. And so this cannot be removed, moved, or discarded like a normal act. In cooperative play, the only difference is that all players share a single face-up prophecy that is available to all of them. When they're out of the round, they can choose to either score this if it's true, or if it's false, they can play it face down, but then it's face down for the rest of the round for everybody. If they score it face up if it's true, then the next player who's out can also score the prophecy as long as it continues to be true. Free will is always first player, but in cooperative play with more than one player, between the ages, pass the entire free will board to the next player in turn order, so they are the one operating free will, and free will start from here, and in that way change the turn order. And that's Almighty. I hope you have fun. If you have any questions, please leave a comment or get in touch. I'm always available to help. Enjoy!